Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us right here on Facebook and on YouTube as we do our best to educate, enlighten, and inspire for the next little while. On tap today, COVID-19. We are learning more about the virus by the day. It was once thought to just attack the lungs and the respiratory system, but now we are learning that it can impact all parts of the body, including the neurologic system. And we're talking about some symptoms here that can be downright bizarre. We're going to be diving into that today with Dr. Neal Barnar. Dr. Barnar, this is just fascinating stuff. Can't wait to talk to you about it.
You bet. Lots of new answers and even more new questions.
Absolutely. And Dr. Barnard, he's going to be sticking around and answering your questions as we open up the exam room mailbag. So go ahead. If you have a question that you'd like for him to answer, go ahead and post that in the comment section right now, or you can tweet them to us using the hashtag Exam Room Podcast. And also today, a little bit of inspiration for Wellness Wednesday. And by little bit, I mean a lot. Adam Sudd overcame a life-threatening battle with substance abuse, and a big part of his success he attributes to adopting a plant-based diet, taking back his life, taking back his health, and we are definitely going to get inspired with you today, Adam Sudd. Cannot wait to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
But first, this is indeed a busy day on the coronavirus front, so let's get you caught up with the latest. Here are your health headlines for Wednesday, July 29th, 2020. The U.S. is now within striking distance of another unwanted milestone in the fight against the coronavirus: 150,000 deaths. As of this morning, the total is just a few hundred cases shy and is expected to surpass the mark when states report their latest data this afternoon. Nationwide, deaths on Tuesday topped 1,000 for the fifth time in the last 7 days. And the New York Times is reporting more than 1,300 fatalities were recorded, pushing the average number of deaths each day over the last week to more than 1,100. Those figures come as a handful of states yesterday, including Florida, the epicenter now for the coronavirus in the U.S., reported a record number of deaths. Meanwhile, residents in 21 states are now living in so-called red zones for the coronavirus, where the rates of infection are more than 100 cases per 100,000 residents. Those states include much of the South, extending as far north along the East Coast as North Carolina, and to the west and California, with Utah and Nevada also making the list. The federal report, first reported on by the New York Times, calls on states to shut down bars and further restrict indoor dining in an effort to slow community spread. All other states are classified as yellow zones. Only Vermont is a green zone state. In other news, Vietnam is taking wide-sweeping measures within the animal trade industry to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Imports of live wild animals are now being banned, while wildlife markets are being eliminated. Additionally, there will be severe crackdowns on illegal hunting and the trade and sale of wild animals online. The novel coronavirus is believed to have been first transferred to humans at a wildlife market in Wuhan, China, late last year. China also now banning the so-called wet markets and consumption of wild animals. And finally, a group of international researchers say the virus responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic has likely been circulating among bats for decades, perhaps even before you were born. The study, published in the journal Nature Microbiology, finds the virus can be traced back as far as 70 years. A key finding also reveals how it is able to jump from bats to humans, as researchers determined one of the older traits found in the genetic makeup of COVID-19 is what is known as the receptor binding domain. In lay terms, it is a protein that is able to recognize and bind to human cells. The researchers hope their findings will prevent future pandemics. Turning the page now. When COVID-19 first began its march around the world, it was largely thought to be a respiratory virus. But in the millions of infections that have occurred over the last 6 months, it has become abundantly clear that it instead can indiscriminately attack other parts of the body, often in surprising ways. And that includes the neurological system. Case studies and reports are popping up from around the globe of patients having everything from a loss of smell to even hallucinations. So what is going on here? For that, we turn to Dr. Neal Barnar. Dr. Barnar, this is just really interesting, these studies and these reports that are coming out. Obviously, this is no longer just about the respiratory system at all. What are we seeing?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and by the way, before we get into the neurological issues, let me come back to Vietnam. I loved what you said, Chuck, about the steps that Vietnam is taking, banning live art markets, banning imports. And let's just say, if you can do it in Vietnam, can we do it here?
Amen to that.
Exactly. There's legislation pending, but the markets are still open. They've got to close. All right. So, but that's not what you asked me about, Chuck. About the neurological effects. Let me actually show you a few slides, if I may. I'd like to show you some images to tell you about a rather surprising case that occurred. Just recently published. Man went into an emergency room with a suicide attempt. 53 years old, he had ingested bleach. Well, what's this about? Well, he was a healthy guy. Let's go ahead to the next slide. He was previously healthy, no mental health issues at all. And when he was in the emergency room, he developed a fever. And his pulse started to become very, very rapid. And he had a chest x-ray. And reading the chest x-ray, he had pneumonia that looked like COVID-19. Later on, so they hospitalized him. They bring him into the wards. He's starting to chant. He's singing to himself. Now, go ahead, please. He developed respiratory difficulties, and it was started to become clear that this was classic COVID-19. But it didn't start that way at all. Go ahead to the next slide, please. As time went on, he started recovering. But when he was recovered enough to describe what had happened to him, it was shocking. He described voices telling him to jump off a bridge or to drink bleach. And for anybody who's ever worked with mental health patients, they will say, this is not just an idea. This was a voice. It's an external voice. It sounds exactly like someone talking to you. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wait a minute. The president talked about bleach and injecting it. However, this man had all of these symptoms 22 days before the president made those controversial and ill-considered remarks. So that had nothing to do with it. Okay, let's go on. Now, years ago, 1986, I was working with the clinical team. And we had a patient who came into the hospital, a young woman, who was wildly psychotic. And it looked like what we would call mania. You're familiar with bipolar illness, where you can be manic and depressed or a mixture of the two, and that's what she had. As time went on, it became clear what the problem was. And the problem was HIV. At that time, we called it HTLV3, but we later came to know that this was AIDS. Go ahead and click through, please. She had HIV. HIV, you think of as a blood disease and an immune problem, but it can affect the brain in a number of ways. So what we have here is a person with neurological illness that was really a sign of COVID. And let me walk you through some of the other manifestations that can happen. You have headaches. You wouldn't think of COVID with a headache because that's very common, but it can happen. But not just headaches. It can be weakness. Let's go ahead through this list. Dizziness, a loss of taste or smell. You've heard people talk about that. Seizures, and also strokes. All of these things can occur, and they can occur early, and they can occur before other symptoms. You're not feverish, you're not coughing, nothing. Okay, so let's talk about coronavirus in the brain. What can all happen? Okay, number one, go ahead and click through this if you would. But you hear people talk about changes in taste and smell. That's not all there is. There's a whole list of other things. Encephalopathy means there's something wrong, confusion, delirium, psychosis, but there isn't necessarily obvious damage that you can see. Now, there's another thing called encephalitis. And encephalitis, go ahead, let's click through. Encephalitis means inflammation, and it can also include hemorrhages, where the tissues of the brain are actually being assaulted by the disease process, and you can see them very clearly. Okay, now, when we're starting to look at things that are even worse, stroke, where you actually have death of a portion of the brain. And next, okay, let's go ahead and click through. You can also see peripheral nerve damage. Now, some of you may remember back in the 1980s, there was a syndrome called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And it came because people had had a vaccine. Now, we think vaccines are great, and vaccines are great. They're really helpful. They wiped out polio for the most part and have been helpful in so many other ways. But we had a vaccine that made everybody nervous because it had a very bad side effect, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and that was paralysis. Other people recovered. But we've seen this also with the coronavirus, that it could cause long-standing peripheral nerve symptoms. Okay, now let's go back to the loss of sense of smell. Doctors call this anosmia, but it just means that you can't smell. And so the question is, why? Well, it's not a sign of brain damage, you'll be glad to know. It doesn't mean that the smell center in the brain is being destroyed. In fact, it's actually not neurons at all. So what is it? What it is the virus is attacking support cells and vascular cells. Those are the blood vessels and the cells that hold up this olfactory neuron network in the brain that allows you to smell. So what that means you're going to get it all back. Recovery will come. Now, it may take a while. It can take weeks, but that's a good thing. It's not the loss of smell or taste in and of itself is not a sign of permanent brain damage. So there you have it. I know it's a frightening thought that the first sign of this respiratory disease may not be in the lungs at all. It may be in the brain in the forms of weakness and fatigue and even dangerous things like hallucinations. But it's a sign really of two things. One is that the virus can go all around the body and do its mischief. But the other thing is that when our bodies are attacked by a virus or anything else, our bodies respond by inflammation. Our white blood cells put chemicals into our blood to try to attack the virus, and they can be poisoning us too. Thought for the future? This viral attack is teaching us a lot about what we had thought of as just functional mental problems. What if depression or psychosis of various kinds were caused not just by trauma, stress, bad childhood, but by chemicals in our bodies? That appears to be the case. There is a growing body of literature showing that depression, for example, is very much like systemic inflammation. You can see inflammation in the brain structures. And we saw years ago when people started using some of the earlier blood pressure medications that you could cause depression by creating chemical imbalances in the body. What I'm getting at is that psychiatric symptoms are not all up here. They are physical. They can be triggered by the coronavirus. And we want to have a high index of suspicion when something new attacks us during the pandemic season. Back to you, Chuck.
Lot to unpack there, but I want to ask you about these psychological symptoms, depression in particular. You're talking about a chemical imbalance. Obviously, it's far too early in our understanding of the coronavirus to know exactly the connection there. But in terms of if you improve your diet, improve your nutrition there, what effect can that have as far as leveling out that chemical imbalance and hopefully alleviating some of those depressive symptoms?
Well, quite apart from COVID-19, our team and others have been studying the connections between physical changes, dietary changes, and brain function. And we stumbled on this completely accidentally. We were doing one of our Geico studies, the car insurance company, where we worked with the employees at 10 different Geico plants in 10 different cities. And their goal was to lose weight and to tackle diabetes by going on a vegan diet, a low-fat, plant-based diet. But in the course of these studies, we started to notice mental changes, good ones. We used paper and pencil tests to assess anxiety symptoms and depressive symptoms. We noticed they improved. We looked at job absenteeism. All these things were getting better. And at first we thought, well, you've just lost 15 pounds. No wonder you're feeling better. I think that's part of it. But we discovered two other things. One was their microbiome is changing. The bacteria in the gut are changing. They create compounds that go to the brain. So if you're getting rid of the bad bacteria, because you're not eating meat and cheese and junk anymore, and you're getting good bacteria because you're eating high fiber vegetables and fruits. They feed back to the brain positively. The other thing is we use a blood test called CRP, or C-reactive protein. It's a sign of inflammation. CRP goes down, mood goes up. And what we feel is happening is that the inflammatory processes that affect the brain are being cooled down, letting the brain get back to how it used to be.
Fascinating science. Absolutely fascinating science. By the way, coming up on tomorrow's show, back to the COVID-19 front, we are going to be joined by a plant-based COVID-19 survivor, Eric O'Gray. His diet, he says, saved his life once and may very well, in the last 4 weeks, done it again. So Eric O'Gray will be on the program tomorrow to share his story with us. And Dr. Barnard, you're going to be sticking around. We're going to be opening up the doctor's mailbag in just a little bit. So if someone has a question for you, they can go ahead right now and post that in the comments section, and you'll be prescribing an answer coming up in just a few minutes.
You bet. I'll stand by.
All right. Moving on. On any given day, an estimated 20 million Americans will be battling addiction. And for many of them, the abuse extends just beyond one substance. My guest today is someone who knows that the struggle is all too real, but he is also living proof that demons can be slayed, mountains can be moved, and the war that rages within can be won. At one time, Adam Sudd's life was literally hanging in the balance. He was being treated for severe depression. He was treating it with his own cocktail of illegal drugs and fast food, both of which he says are equally deadly. Adam was well north of 300 pounds with undiagnosed diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. To put it mildly, he was in a bad way. That is, until he found a will to live. A will, he says, that was strengthened with a plant-based diet. With that, we welcome the inspirational Adam Sudd to the Exam Room Live. My man, it is so good to see you again.
It's great to see you too, Chuck. It's always great to be here.
What a story you have indeed. We've talked a little bit about food addiction on this show, but you were literally battling substance abuse at the same time. Walk us through where you were in your darkest hour and how you got to where it is that you are today.
Yeah. So back in 2012, like you mentioned before, I was 350 pounds. I had undiagnosed diabetes, heart disease. I had erectile dysfunction, obviously, that I was aware of. I was struggling from substance abuse, where I had been severely addicted to Adderall for probably 10 years at that point. And the average prescription for Adderall is about 10 milligrams a day. At this point of my life, I was doing 450 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams a day. I was popping opiates in order to get out of a drug-induced psychosis that would start to occur after 5 days without sleeping. I was eating between 5,000 to 10,000 calories of fast food on a regular basis, and living hurt in every sense of the word, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And on August 21st of 2012, life just became too difficult for me. I was 30 years old, and I had become so greatly disconnected from every meaningful bond in my life that I attempted suicide by drug overdose. And I can remember waking up on the floor of my apartment, having experienced the most terrifying event I'd ever gone through, and feeling this immense relief. And that relief let me know that my suicide attempt was not an attempt to end my life. See, I thought that I tried to end my life because I thought my life was intolerable. But the reason I was relieved is because there was something so meaningful, so important in my life that I wanted to stick around for it despite the pain. See, the reason I attempted suicide was because I didn't know how to live with the pain. My life had become too painful a place to be. And so I checked into rehab, where I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, erectile dysfunction, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, anxiety disorder, sleep disorder, attention deficit disorder. I was put on a cabinet's worth of medication for life. And thankfully, I had heard about a plant-based diet about a few years ago from a man named Rip Esselstyn. And I decided that along with my other recovery modalities, I was going to adopt a plant-based diet in order to reverse these conditions and take charge of my life. And within 4 months, I had reversed my diabetes, I had reversed my heart disease, my erectile dysfunction. Within 10 months, I had lost over 100 pounds. And within a year, I was off of every single medication I was put on in rehab, including the antidepressants, the mood stabilizers, the sleeping medications, the anxiety medications, the ADHD medications, everything. And what was amazing was this incredible gift that food became for me. It became this vehicle that allowed me to return to that authentic version of myself. See, I thought that recovery was about becoming a sober, healthy person. And what food allowed me to understand was that all these changes that happened were possible because I was always capable of them. I've always been worthy. I've always been enough. I've always been everything I've ever needed to be, because recovery is more so an act of remembering who we've always been before the world got its hands on us. And that's what food did for me. It taught me the same thing, that the only reason why I suffered from those conditions is because that's exactly what's supposed to happen when I eat those type of foods and live that type of life. The same thing with the depression, the anxiety, the drug use. It's exactly what's supposed to happen. When I don't know how to show up for myself in a loving way, when I don't know how to have a compassionate voice for myself, and when I ignore those meaningful bonds in life that make me feel alive. And as of today, I've lost 180 pounds. I'm the healthiest I've ever been. I have a meaningful and connected life that's greater than anything I could have ever imagined. And I know for a fact, I believe for a fact, that my diet had a profound impact on all of those things. I'm being able to reconnect to those meaningful bonds. I'm being able to get myself through those experiences of sadness and anxiety and see them as a gift rather than a curse. And so now I'm running the study called the Infinite Study, which is a research study, the very first controlled trial ever to investigate the effects of nutrition and also plant-based nutrition on early addiction recovery and mental health outcomes.
You know, I'm fascinated by this study. We're going to talk about that in a second here. But I want to ask you, in terms of just the overall addictiveness of food compared to substances, how do you think that they compare? I will tell you that for me, quitting smoking was a breeze. I would not consider myself to have been an alcoholic, but I was fond of the bottle. I will put it to you that way. Certainly smoked enough marijuana for a lifetime before I was 30. All of that was so much easier to quit than fast food. Was it the same for you as well? How would you rate the addictiveness of these things?
Well, we have to look at addiction from a different perspective, right? We've all bought into this chemical dependency model as the factor that determines how strong your compulsion, how strong your bond is with it. And that's the key word, your bond, right? And what addiction really is, and I believe this to be true, and I've read a lot of work from a man named Johann Hari, is that what addiction really is an inability to show up and be present in your life because your life has become too painful a place to be. And whatever that behavior it is, whether it's food, whether it's sex, whether it's drugs, whichever that behavior is that for the first time allows you to successfully escape that pain so that you don't have to show up authentically in a life that you cannot tolerate, you're going to bond with that. It's going to be meaningful. It's going to be like you're getting a hug from the world saying, I got you. Whether it's food first or whether it's drugs first, whatever that first meaningful connection is that allows you to escape, that's what's going to make it difficult. Is that meaningful connection that you have with the behavior, not necessarily the chemical dependency or the chemical hooks itself. More so like in what point in your life did this behavior come in and give you this big hug and try and soothe you when your life was too painful? So I don't really think that there's a difference. I think that it's about understanding that these are reasonable responses to life. These are meaningful signals. And when we use substances or behaviors to escape life that's too painful, we're gonna look at it as something incredibly powerful in our life, and we're gonna form a meaningful bond with it. And it's that bond, however powerful that bond is, that's what makes it difficult. That's what creates the strong tendency to want to hold on to it and not let go.
I'm going to have a t-shirt printed up for you that just says #truth across it. And you just wear that loud and proud every day, man. Because God knows you are spitting nothing but the truth here. Let's talk a little bit more about the Infinite study that you're running. I understand that you're about a year in. We don't have to talk about the results because obviously it's not done yet. But I mean, you really are working on something that could revolutionize the way that people battling substance abuse are treated moving forward.
Yeah, so it was surprising to me after I got sober and spent some time going back to school studying nutrition. It was surprising to me to find that there had never been a study ever done to investigate the effects of nutrition on early addiction recovery outcomes. And what I mean by early addiction recovery outcomes is those mediating factors that strengthen an individual's foundation for recovery within the first 24 hours of checking into rehab in, say, 6 months. So we're not really looking at sobriety as an outcome, but things like resilience, self-compassion, anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive drug use. And so I found this really to be an unfortunate situation, because anybody who checks into treatment today, you're going to see that not only are you fed the exact same thing as everyone else, but you're all fed at the exact same time, and nothing is allowed in and nothing is allowed out. It's an unbelievable opportunity to investigate the effects and the impact that food has on this individual thing. And again, since sobriety isn't the outcome that we're looking at, the data is going to be applicable to the entire human population, because what's unique about addiction recovery is that it forces individuals to do the work that every single human is going to have to do at some point in their life, which is to face those dark parts of themselves and then have the tools and the ability to move through it with grace and with resilience in order to create a greater and more positive way of living that's closer to their authentic self. And so we're doing a full microbiome study. We're running obviously full blood biomarkers. We're measuring emotional and psychological outcomes like resilience, like self-compassion, like anxiety, depression, mania, obsessive compulsive drug use. And it's really going to be an incredible, we have an unbelievable team, an amazing woman named Tara Kemp, who I know that Neal knows really well. She's the lead investigator. We have Drs. Dean and Aisha Sherzai on the study. Dr. Frank Cusimano is our microbiome specialist. And yeah, we have 7 months worth of data, and we're very, very excited by it.
Oh man, you know what? I wish that we had more time on the show today to talk a little bit more about this and dive deeper into the study and your story. So what I want to do is extend an invite to you to come back and join me on the Exam Room podcast, where we do have unlimited amounts of time, and you and I can really dive into the ins and outs of this and explain it a little bit more in depth, because I really think that you, sir, are on the verge of having a major breakthrough in the treatment of substance abuse.
Well, I appreciate it. I absolutely consider it done. I'm there.
Cool, man. Let's set that up for in the next few weeks. But in the meantime, if somebody wants to get involved with the study, help you out, how can they do that?
Well, there's a GoFundMe. We're trying to raise some additional funds for the microbiome sequencing. So you can go to this GoFundMe page. You can watch a video that we shot about a year ago that describes the study. It was and everything that's involved. You can make a donation, and all these funds are again to pay for the microbiome sequencing. You can go to my website, which is plantbasedforpositivechange.org. That's my nonprofit that is funding the study. And you can follow me on Instagram at plantbasedaddict.
Outstanding. Everybody go give him a follow, and we will be tweeting out a link to that GoFundMe page here momentarily. Check out @Carroll WLC. Adam Sudd, talk to you again in a couple of weeks, man. Congratulations on all the success so far and everything that is still to come.
My pleasure. And it's an absolute honor to be here with you and with Dr. Barnar. Dr. Barnar is a hero of mine. I wouldn't be alive today without his work. So if he's still here and he can hear me, again, every time I've seen him, I've thanked him, but I'm never going to stop thanking him. So appreciate it.
He is indeed still here. So consider the message relayed, my friend. We will talk to you again soon.
Okay, take care.
All right. Time now to open up the doctor's mailbag with Dr. Barnard, where he will be answering one of your questions. So if you have a question you'd like to have answered, go ahead and drop that in the comment section. Now, Dr. Barnard, what a story Adam has, right? I mean, just incredible.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a terrific story. What he did personally was great, but the fact that he's also bringing it far beyond to bring the message to other people, and the work that he is doing and that Tara Kemp is doing on this, it's really groundbreaking. And the results that they are going to have, I think, will go for anybody who's ever had any struggle, even remotely related to either of these. And we're going to have a wonderful data set to look at.
I just cannot wait. I'm counting down the days, my friend. But right now, let's count down to opening up the doctor's mailbag. And today's question comes to us from YouTube. Someone wants to know, can the clogging of arteries start in the pregnancy stage if the mother eats a bad diet?
What a great question. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking that because obviously when a baby is all the way from conception in through infancy and toddlerhood and so forth, you have effectively the same metabolic processes happening throughout life. So heart disease doesn't necessarily begin when you're 55, 65, 75. To tease this out, a researcher named Michael Skilton, Skilton, and his colleagues in Australia actually did an interesting study that they presented here in Washington, D.C. About 2 years ago. They looked at women who were in the middle of pregnancy, and they looked at the healthfulness of their diets, and specifically they looked at women where weight issues were an issue. Obviously, everybody gains a certain amount of weight during pregnancy, but some women have a bigger struggle with it, perhaps reflective of dietary choices. What they found was quite groundbreaking and shocking. When their babies were born, the researchers did an ultrasound, which you can do non-invasively. You do an ultrasound of the baby on the first day of life, and they looked at their coronary arteries, the same coronary arteries that when you're older will thicken up with atherosclerosis. And what they found was that the heavier the women had been during pregnancy, the more the babies had thickened artery walls at birth, meaning that the process of artery changes were occurring before the children had even been born. Now, that obviously gives us some lessons for somebody who's, any woman who's pregnant knows this is true. You are the recipient of lots of unwanted advice from people, and their whole preoccupation is eat more, eat this, eat that. And what they're forgetting is your baby is really small and doesn't need to eat like a linebacker. And the healthier the diet for the mom, the safer it is for the baby. And of course, that means vegetables and fruits and whole grains and beans. Take your B12, take your prenatals. That's good for you, and it's good for your baby.
All right. Eddie, GF, Gail, everyone else that posted a question we didn't get to today, have no fear. We will save it and try to get you an answer on an upcoming episode. So with that in mind, if there's still something lingering on in that brain of yours that you would like to address, go ahead and post that in the comment section. Now we will keep that as well. And Dr. Barnard, before we wrap things up today, more big news coming out of the Barnard Medical Center. People have been asking for it, and now we're able to deliver. Now available in even more states. We added some over the last week or so, but I understand there are 2 new additions today.
Well, let's see. We already talked about Florida. We talked about Georgia, so everybody in Atlanta can join in. And then it was Illinois and Chicago. Obviously, all our friends in Chicago. And today, who did we add? We added Indiana, and we added Pennsylvania. So for my friends in Harrisburg and everybody up in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh, we are now ready to see you. So thanks to everybody for sticking with BMC as we're gradually expanding to more and more jurisdictions.
And we're trying to bring more and more online, as I understand it, as well.
Exactly. And so if people are interested in more information, you just go to barnardmedical.org and you'll see lots of details there about what telemedicine can do.
Outstanding. Now, let me give you the full rundown of everywhere we are available. You just heard Dr. Barnard mention Indiana and Pennsylvania, brand new to the roster, plus Illinois, Florida, Georgia, all within recent weeks. That's on top of California, New York, right here in Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, Missouri, Arizona, Colorado, Massachusetts, and Kentucky. You add all those up, that's more than a quarter of the country at this point, and we are not done yet. You just heard what Dr. Barnard said. So you can go ahead and schedule your appointment today by visiting barnardmedical.org or picking up the phone, calling 202-527-7500, and go ahead, visit with any one of our plant-based doctors and dietitians and get moving on your own journey to health. And if you are not in any one of those locations, but you still want to beef up on your nutrition, no problem, because coming up is the International Conference on Nutrition in Medicine. We're talking about 3 days of the leading doctors and professionals in the medical field. We're talking about 3 days where they will be presenting the absolute latest cutting-edge research on nutrition, plant-based diets, and health. That's coming up August 6th through 8th. Just a few names that will be there. We've got Dr. Barnard. We also have Dr. Kim Williams, who was on the show earlier this week. Dr. Michael Greger will be there. Dr. Danielle Bellardo, Dr. Christy Funk, our own Dr. Hannah Kaliova, Dr. Walter Willett, the Fiber Queen, Lee Crosby, dietitian extraordinaire. She too will be presenting at ICNM this year, plus so many other guests, August 6th through 8th. To register, visit pcrm.org/ICNM. Here's the cool thing. Exclusive just for Exam Room Live viewers. If you use the promo code EXAM20, lowercase, exam, and then the number 20, when you register, you will save 20% off of the registration costs. So that's over at pcrm.org/ICNM using the promo code EXAM20, August 6th through 8th. It's just going to be 72 hours, the likes of which you will never, ever forget. And if you're looking for even more inspiration after hearing from Adam today, well, check this out. Head over to Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher, wherever shows are available, and search for our sister show, The Exam Room Podcast. And you will hear on the most recent episode a conversation that I had with a woman by the name of Laura Sines. Now, before Laura was even 25, she was diagnosed with so many conditions: Crohn's disease, fibromyalgia, arthritis, so many others. She was not healthy. She was not happy. And then she goes on this incredible journey to reclaim her health. Along the way, she adopts a plant-based diet, and now she is devoting others. She is devoting her life, I should say, to teaching others the benefits of changing their diets and finally walking into the healthy life that they always so deserve. So that's over at Apple Podcast and Spotify, Stitcher, wherever shows are available. Just hit that subscribe button. And if you would be so kind, also leave a 5-star rating. For this show, that's going to do it for us today. My thanks again to the ever so inspirational Adam Sudd for joining us, and to the crew behind the scenes that makes the magic happen. Our director today is Emily Colon, and our producer is Donna Steele. On behalf of Dr. Neal Barnar and everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so much for watching us today. And until tomorrow, please remember to take a stand, stay safe, and keep it plant-based.